one of the most legendary partnerships in show business history, Elvis Presley and Colonel Tom Parker. For decades, the Colonel has been cast as the villain in the Elvis story, the man who held him back, or worse, used him. But what if that story isn't the truth? Greg McDonald knew them both. What he saw behind the scenes wasn't a caricature of a greedy manager and a naive star. It was something far more complicated. I'm Lee Habib, and this is the story of the greatest partnership in showbiz history. And this is Our American Stories.
My name is Greg McDonald. I was a long-time friend and associate and employee of Colonel Tom Parker. And after Elvis passed away, I was coming home to Palm Springs where the Colonel and I lived. And I'd been out on the road with Ricky Nelson for, a tour. Well, after Elvis died, people would come into Ricky's dressing room and really give us a hard time about the Colonel because they knew that we were close to him. And it caused many, many fights and a lot of trouble. So I got home and I'd say to the Colonel, you got to write a book, man. You've got to get this out as the truth because this story is becoming a folklore. And we really got to stop it because we are actually getting in shout-outs and almost fistfights on the road. All of us, not just Rick and I, but all the other guys. And Colonel wouldn't do it. And I was backstage at the Leon Russell shows in Nashville, and Minnie Pearl, who was a dear friend of the Colonel's, and she came and said, "You've got to write a book. You'll have to do it because he'll never do it. It's just not his way."
For the time Elvis died till today, I've turned down more books for big money. Because my story, they will not print. He said, "No, we want the dirt." All I know is I sleep very good at night, and Elvis and I were friends.
The Colonel's born in Breda, Holland, and from a very, very, very poor working family, living in an apartment, and his apartment was over a horse stall, and the horses were to pull the big boats along the canals in Holland. And the Colonel used to say from time to time he didn't like his father. They didn't get along at all. He said he was a bad, bad man. Told me several times he was a bad guy. And I never really knew exactly why. It was years before I was born. But he loved his mother, and he supported his mother till the end of her life. Right before the Depression, things were very tough, and he got out of town. He really went to work on a boat. He wasn't coming to America. It wasn't his plan. It just happened that the boat turned out to be running illegal liquor on the boat. The captain did. So when they pulled up near America, the Coast Guard brought him into Mobile, and they arrested the captain when they got him inside the limits, and they put the Colonel and the rest of the crew out on a pier, and they didn't speak English. And that's how the Colonel got to America. The Colonel got his name, he was up in Virginia's, and he met a family called the Parkers, and they had a pony circus. So that's where the Colonel started in the carnival world with the Parker Pony Circus. It was a family of nice people that fed him and took him in, and after a while they adopted him. The Colonel was actually adopted by the Parkers, and he changed his name to Tom Parker. He took the name Tom from his uncle in Holland, who was a famous circus clown in Holland. His name was Tom, and he loved him. So he named himself Tom and Parker from the Parker Pony Circus. Well, Colonel went out and joined the Army because it was that time. He didn't have much choice. He joined the Army twice, and he was twice honorably discharged. So he didn't become a colonel until he became a music promoter, and 2 different governors in 2 states made him an honorary colonel. So we're working at MGM Studios, One day, Eddie Bonja picks up the phone. He was Tom Diskin's nephew. And somebody was very angry on the phone that Elvis hadn't showed up for a recording session. So they were just raising hell with us on the phone. The colonel could hear the problem. So the colonel told Eddie and I to tell those guys that we forgot to tell Elvis. We hang up. So one of the only times that I ever popped up and said anything, I said, Colonel, we told Joe Esposito yesterday what time this session was. Why do we have to take the blame? So the colonel walks out to our part of the office and looks at me and he says, Mr. McDonald, how many records did you sell last year? And I said, well, none, sir. And he said, the artist always wears the white hat. Our job is to wear the black hat and take the blame. Don't ever forget it. He must have said that to me 10 times. The artist always wears the white hat, no matter what. So the rest of his career, and after Elvis passed, the colonel kept his word on that. Maybe Elvis had done some things that weren't the right thing to do. The colonel would never, ever give him up. Ever. Till the day the colonel died, he never stood up and said what he maybe could have said. And that's why the artist wears the white hat. You got to remember that in those days, there hadn't been 100 books written about Elvis with a lot of bad things in the books. They all wanted to say something bad about Colonel Parker because it must be the colonel's fault, whatever the issue was. It couldn't be Elvis.
You can promote all you want to, but if the people don't want to buy a ticket, it doesn't help. So I did my part, Elvis did his show, and we were lucky.
If the colonel told you he was going to do something, you could absolutely count on it. He just needed to shake your hand. He was a rare guy. And people had the opposite feeling about him, and they're so dead wrong. They don't get it. Everybody knew. When people say hard things about the colonel, they think they're defending Elvis. But the truth is, if you were up in Elvis's house here in Palm Springs, and Elvis might have been mad and cursing the colonel, but if you did, you'd get thrown out of the house. It's fine for him to do it, but he didn't let other people say anything about the colonel. That was his colonel, even if he was mad at him. You know, in these recent movies, you know, they have the colonel being a carny when he meets Elvis. And of course, he had been out of the carnival business for years and years and years before he ever met Elvis Presley. And he was already a superstar manager, one of the few that existed. And he had already managed big stars and had many hit records and movies before he ever met Elvis. I always kind of look at it, if you look at the Sun records, and I really like Sam Phillips was a friend of mine, and I liked the Sun records. But the reality of it is Elvis got started in the rockabilly world down there at Sun in Memphis, made some great records. But if you really analyze the colonel's input to Elvis's career in those early days was he got Elvis off of Sun Records, he used to say. And he got Elvis off the Louisiana Hayride. People say, well, why do you say that? He said, well, look at the next album. The colonel bought the contract off of Sam Phillips at Sun, and then he got reimbursed by RCA. Then Colonel took Elvis Presley to New York. And what did he find in New York? Elvis had been singing Blue Moon of Kentucky by Bill Monroe and singing all of those really cool rockabilly songs, but they were just regional, and they were probably never going to be more than regional hits. Even though they were great, they were great. And Scotty and Bill were great, and all of that stuff is legendary now. But the truth is, the colonel took Elvis to New York City and introduced him to the Brill Building. Look at those recordings and the quality and the level worldwide of hits those were. It's what made Elvis. And of course, the colonel took him, of course, to Ed Sullivan and the Dorsey brothers and to those TV shows. None of those country people had any way to get on those shows. No way. Eddie Arnold had got on those shows because he was with the Colonel. Elvis going on as a sort of a rockabilly country kid, that was unheard of. And it made him a huge star. It made him a worldwide star. What the Colonel really brought was the music business to Elvis. So the Colonel started his publishing company, put the biggest publishers in New York City in the company, and they went from there. The reason that number of hits, they weren't rockabilly hits. Elvis brought his rockabilly style to them, but you just look at the songs from Jailhouse Rock, just one right after another. The great writers at that time were introduced to Elvis, and Elvis met the publishing world. So the Colonel brought a lot to the party because Abe Lasvogel and William Morris handled Eddie Arnold. The Colonel had already been to Hollywood and made movies with William Morris before he met Elvis. So he was already in the game. And what people don't know is he brought Elvis to that. He brought that talent, that incredible talent. He brought it to all the right places. They were partners at the end of his life, but in the beginning, they should have had a production company as partners. And one of the issues of that is Elvis wouldn't let the Colonel manage anybody else. And the Colonel and Elvis had a deal that the Colonel wouldn't manage anyone else and Elvis wouldn't work for anyone else. So they weren't managers don't necessarily do that. A lot of managers will have 10 artists. Elvis wouldn't have it. So they were really partners, but the Colonel gets called a manager that charged too much commission. Just not true. Because the Colonel's partnership deal, the infamous 50-50 deal, that was on the net proceeds. That wasn't on the gross like most managers work on 15% of the gross. Colonel never had a deal for 50%, but he never got it. He never got it. He's been blamed for that deal for the last 45 years. It never happened. He got to 25%, and in the last few, it couldn't. There wasn't any money left. Elvis spent all the money. It was not the Colonel gambling. It had nothing to do. Elvis's money was separate from Colonel's gambling. So they should have been partners, but didn't happen. So Colonel gets to be the bad guy. I talked to Baron Hilton once about the Colonel's gambling because there's so much said about it. He says, two kinds of gamblers. He says there's guys that will gamble until they have to go over to the casino office and pledge their car. And then there's guys like the Colonel who get up and walk away when they're done, only because they're done. It's not like he ever ran out of money. And he died a very wealthy man. People don't get it. He wasn't a broke gambler, not at all. When Elvis was drafted and went into the service, RCA and Colonel Parker re-recorded a lot of singles so that they could be released intermittently while he was in Germany. Elvis was really worried about his career going away while he was in the Army, but the truth is he had consistent hot hit singles through the whole time. He was hot as a pistol till the day he got out. And as soon as he got out, he had Elvis appearing on the Frank Sinatra special down in Miami and had movies coming up. And of course, his biggest single of his career was It's Now or Never. And that was released just as he was brought out of the Army. That was his biggest single of his career. So they handled it very well, being that he was gone for 2 years. Colonel and Morris office and RCA, they handled it very well. In 1971, RCA had set up, and the Colonel had set up a session in Nashville at RCA Studio B, and they wanted a Christmas album. Well, Elvis wanted to record, but he wanted to do other songs. He wanted to go in and do some Bob Dylan covers and some Peter, Paul, and Mary stuff, which was hotter at that time. And Elvis, of course, his Christmas album in 1958 was the biggest Christmas album ever. And a lot of people don't realize that Elvis recorded his version of White Christmas, and they sent the dub up to New York. And they played that dub for Irving Berlin, who wrote that song, White Christmas. And at that time, it was the biggest Christmas song ever and had been sung by Bing Crosby. And it was huge. Irving Berlin hates it. He tells them, don't put it out. It's my song. You can't put it out. Well, of course they could, and they did. So Irving Berlin hires a room full of people to call radio stations and tell them not to play the record. It's sacrilegious. At the end of Irving Berlin's career, disc jockey asked him, Mr. Berlin, what was the biggest royalty check and on what song was it during your life? What was your most profitable hit? And he said, Elvis Presley's version of White Christmas. The Colonel, it was his idea 100%. Elvis didn't want to do it. He was doing Blowing in the Wind. He did some great songs, but they weren't what was planned for the session. And the Colonel almost never went to recording sessions. So we were in Nashville and at Chet Atkins' office, actually, at RCA. And we could hear what Elvis, there was a speaker in the conference room. We could hear what they were recording in the studio. Well, Colonel would send his right-hand man, Tom Diskin, into the studio to get Elvis, because Colonel would never walk in there. They had separate turfs. So he'd bring Elvis out into the parking lot where I was recently, and you could see them friendly talking, and the Colonel saying, you got to sing Christmas, Elvis. And Elvis saying, yeah, but he wanted to do gospel songs. So this was going on for a week. They called it the marathon. And he cut some of the greatest songs Elvis ever cut. So he'd sing 3 Christmas songs, and then he went back in the studio because he knew we were listening, and he recorded a song called He Touched Me, which was one of his biggest records and became one of his gospel albums that he got the only Grammy for. And How Great Thou Art. The Colonel, who was a consummate concert showman, always traveled ahead on the road. He usually had a Learjet, maybe a Lear 23. He worked on security. He met with the building managers. He was in charge of tickets. As soon as Elvis came into that town and walked on the stage, the Colonel would leave and go to the next town. And he would arrange hotels. He would do so many things that a modern day manager wouldn't even talk about. Colonel sort of supervised everything, and Elvis knew it. He was also wrote and placed all the advertising, always bought all the advertising. There was no real promoter, even though Concerts West was officially the promoter of the tour. The Colonel was the promoter. Modern day managers from Hollywood, they would no more go out into the middle of this country and promote a show for anything. They wouldn't do that. They'd sell the show to the local promoter or the big nationwide promoter. In those latter years, Elvis was having a lot of problems with various, usually prescription medicine, but he was in some real trouble. There was no Betty Ford Center at that time. Even though we lived here in Palm Springs, Coachella Valley, where Betty Ford was, it wasn't here yet. And people didn't understand a celebrity would never do that. It appeared that when Elvis would get away from Graceland and get out of his bedroom, he would clean up. And when he went on the road, he was so busy that he would straighten out. And so the Colonel and everyone around thought, and Elvis wanted to work. So spending money every time he'd get to Memphis, he'd start buying Cadillacs. And they all thought if he got out on the road, from time to time, he'd get on the road and that would straighten him out. And then other times it wouldn't. So that was the only answer Colonel had, was just to keep him busy so that he wouldn't have that problem. But it obviously didn't work. The Colonel loved Elvis like a son, and Elvis would avoid the Colonel because I believe that Elvis didn't want the Colonel to see him in bad shape. And I think that's what caused most of their beefs. When they get in a fuss, it was Elvis missed some shows and Elvis did some shows that weren't worthy of Elvis Presley. And the Colonel was all business. And that's what would cause the issues. And Elvis was going to do what Elvis was going to do. People think that people had control over him. The Colonel had control, or Vernon. Everybody around him would know that that wasn't true. Elvis told people from time to time that if they didn't get him drugs, he'd buy a drugstore. And he wasn't kidding, saying he could do it. Surprised that he didn't. So the Colonel just didn't live inside of Elvis's personal life like that. He just didn't. People think he did. But Colonel lived in Palm Springs, California, and Elvis lived in Memphis, Tennessee most of the time. And the problems in the last years, the Colonel was a consummate showman, and he was a serious businessman. And when Elvis would miss a show or do a show that really shouldn't have happened, they'd have trouble. And that's what caused it, and they still loved each other. But Colonel was determined to get him straightened out. It was hard. People think you could control Elvis Presley, and that's just a joke. He knew he was the king. He was Elvis Presley, and no one was going to tell him what to do. He was a good guy, too. He was a great guy, actually. But he knew who he was. The day Elvis died, I was at Ricky Nelson's house in Hollywood. And Rick Nelson's maid came into the music room and said, "Mr. McDonald, Elvis Presley died." And Ricky and I didn't believe her. Then the phone rang immediately, and it was the Colonel. So the Colonel wanted me to go to Palm Springs immediately. He told me Elvis died. So Ricky and I went together to Palm Springs, and we pulled up to Elvis's house first. And there's a few hundred people in the street, and they've pushed the gate open, and they pushed the door open, and they're taking everything out of the house that they could carry. So I run up into the house and chase the people out. We're trying to get the cops there. And it's really funny. I'm chasing these people out the gate, and Ricky Nelson's holding the gate so they can't come back in. And they're all looking for autographs, and Rick won't do it because Elvis just died. So Rick's holding the gate, and every time I bring a group down and throw them out. This went on forever, and then the police showed up. And then we went down to the Colonel's house down the street. There was incredible number of press trucks and press people out in front of the house. So, it took several days for them to pull away from the house. But we had to look out for Marie, Colonel Parker's wife, Marie. Bad day, very bad day. As I now get older, there's nobody from All Star Shows was the name of Colonel Parker's company in Madison, Tennessee. And unfortunately, everybody from All Star Shows has passed away. I'm the last guy left from All Star Shows, and I'm no kid. So I kind of think it's my obligation, let them know that the Colonel really didn't wear the black hat, he wore a white hat.
It's unexplainable. They say anybody else could have done it, perhaps so. But I happened to be the one that was with him. He did his part, I did mine, and we were lucky. Great talent, and we had a great show and a lot of fun.